spiritual influence to these objects in there, rather than just recognizing they were meant, given by God, to be a blessing of a calendar or a clock, which is what it says. They will be for signs and seasons, days and years, Moedim, etc.
Yeah. So when we look at the gospel and the stars, we see that the ancient Hebrew understanding shared by early believers was that the Mazzaroth told a complete redemptive story. 12 major constellations corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. We could say that. And they tell a story in order. Welcome to Enfoque with Marcia Castillo once more. Like every Monday, we are here to help you navigate the end times with wisdom and understanding. And our friend and colleague, Mondo Gonzales from Prophecy Watchers, joins us again for a very important discussion. We're going to talk about the Mazzaroth, which is Hebrew for zodiac signs. Woo! So, settle your heart. Quiet your mind and let's listen. Mondo, welcome once again to Enfoque.
It's always good to be here with you.
Thank you so very much for being with us. The last time that you and I recorded together, we talked about astronomy versus astrology. And we talked about the fact that astronomy points to God and it studies creation, while astrology replaces God and assigns power to creation. And based on that discussion, we decided to expand this topic a little bit. And we're going to begin with the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 32, where the Lord is asking a question that still echoes through the heavens. And we're going to be reading from the Amplified, and it says, "Can you lead forth the signs of the zodiac in their season? Or can you guide Arcturus with his sons, which is the star of the bear with her young?" Not a person, but a bright constellation or a star. So we're going to be discussing the fact that this is not just poetry, not a myth, and definitely not astrology. It's God speaking of something real, something that was ordered and intentional. Tell me.
This is an awesome place to begin, because what God is doing there in context is, Job has had a tough situation in the book of Job, but then God shows up because Job, in his pain and suffering, begins to demand an answer from God. Unfortunately demand, like, you will tell me, I want an answer. So God says, all right, I'm going to show up. But God shows up and begins to ask him a series of 95 questions, just about God's universe. Could be about an ostrich or an eagle or the oceans or the snow, climate cycles. So he begins to ask Job all these questions about the universe, and asking Job, what do you know? Do you know this? You know that? And Job's like, oh, I don't know that. I don't know that. And so Job gets pretty humbled, realizing that he doesn't know a lot of what God has done. And ultimately, God's heart is, Job, look, I have it all figured out. You don't need to worry. You need to trust me. But one of the things that he asks him is, can you lead forth the Mazzaroth, the zodiac signs? And what that means is, if we understand that as the, I've just, pardon all the flat earthers, but I don't mean that in a mean way, but the earth revolves around the sun. And so every month in that period, there's a constellation that is appearing behind the sun. And so as you go around, that changes every month. And so that's called the zodiacal signs. There's 12 of them, and one for each month. God set it up that way. And these signs are very, very important. And so what God is doing is asking Job that question. Can you lead the signs? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth, the signs in their season? And this is what to me is quite amazing, because I've loved astronomy, really since high school and college when I took it, but I also do a lot of astrophotography, as many people know, with our Psalm 19 project. We have a very nice observatory. But so I have to know the constellations and their predictability because of planning out which targets we want to, photograph. So God set it up so perfectly for this exact thing. And therefore, let me just say this too, that there's no doubt, we know that God doesn't do anything by accident. And so it could be that God could have created all the stars, Genesis 1:16, and he could have created them all equally bright and equally spaced. And so when you looked up, you just simply saw a very equal distribution of stars, which actually would be kind of boring. Oh, look at that, the stars up. But that's
They're all
not
the
what he
same.
did. All the same. They'd be all the same. Again, distance, brightness, luminosity, etc. But what he did is he created very specific stars at distances and brightnesses, which create what we call constellations. The Big Dipper is a very great one. Orion is out right now. It's awesome. So we see these things, and we understand that those, like the Big Dipper or the Bear, Ursa Major, doesn't necessarily look like a bear. I mean, you got to be creative, or
Yeah.
Orion like a hunter, but pick one. But yet those are the names that have been given to these constellations. And so God specifically made these constellations to have these names associated with them. Again, very distinct amongst all of the 88 constellations that you have today. So what that does is it kind of begs the question. God is asking Job, can you lead, the Mazzaroth in its season? So he obviously said, well, no, I didn't do that. That was you. Yes, it was God. Even mentioning Arcturus there. Arcturus is one of the brightest stars that if you follow the Big Dipper handle, it leads you right to Arcturus. And so anyways, what this doing is it forces us to say, well, why did God create it like this? Why did he create all these constellations? Why did he create them in a monthly cycle? Why did he create it? Well, we know, and I'll just say this last thing, in Genesis 1:14 through 16, that he created the sun and the moon and the stars for seasons, for signs, for other things. And we'll get more into that. But he did it for a very specific reason. If you go out at any time, you go out at midnight and you look at where the Big Dipper is, it'll tell you that at midnight, you'll know exactly what month it is. It's amazing. It's pretty amazing. And if you know how to do it, you can actually tell the exact time. Like you could say, oh, it's 2 a.m. So it's very fascinating that the stars were made for all those reasons. And again, we'll talk about the gospel and the stars, which is fun.
Would you say that he not drew, but he designed a map through the constellations to tell us the story of the gospel?
This is where you get into a lot of people that will they don't like the gospel and the stars idea. There's a lot of writings about it, but let me read a passage, because to me, I understand that we don't know everything, right? The secret things belong to the Lord. Deuteronomy
I
29,
think we know
29.
that. I think we know. We're like Job.
Yes.
I don't really
Yep.
know anything.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand. We're trying to understand God's creation. And so in Romans 10, it says this, and it's talking about the gospel. It says in verse 16, well, look, I'll read verse 15. It says, how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But I say, have they not heard? Yes, indeed. Their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. Now, this is a quote. What he does in Romans 10 is he quotes Psalm 19. And Psalm 19 is describing the heavens declaring the glory of God, and it talks about the sun going in its circuit, which is what Job says. But what he says there, it says their voice has gone out into all the earth. He's talking about the stars. He's talking about the constellations.
Yeah.
And their voice has gone out, but their sound has gone out, but they don't use words. Well, So what are they saying? This is where he brings it up in Romans 1, that the creation is showing his amazing divine nature and power. And so people are without excuse. But the reason I bring Romans 10 up is Paul is somehow indicating, he's saying, look, we need to get the gospel out. We need to preach. We need to send preachers. He goes, but just so that you know, have they not already heard? And he quotes the stars. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Paul, he doesn't explain what he's saying, but he's giving a connection that the gospel, it doesn't just say creation, it says the gospel has been revealed through the voice of them going out, which is Psalm 19, which is clearly the stars. So when people ask me, do I believe in the gospel of the stars? Well, it's hard for me not to believe in something, because clearly Romans 10 is using the word gospel of Jesus Christ, and he's describing it with the stars. I wish Paul would have given a line-by-line explanation, which is what we're going to try to do.
And when you say gospel, or when you're referring to gospel, that word, in case there's someone that's connected and doesn't really understand the meaning of that word, it's very simple. The good news. My goodness. There's a lot of people that are in touch with nature and in touch with their, let's call it their spirituality, but they're not taking into account the beauty, the majesty, and the power of God as a creator. And he, when I hear you talking, I can't help myself but think God left a message on the earth through archaeology. God left a message in the stars through the Mazzaroth. I mean, it's like he's everywhere. He's talking to us. And like you were saying, the stars don't have a voice, but they have a voice. What?
That's the fascinating thing about the way that Psalm 19 reads, is that it says their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. And if you look at the, again, just the original language, it's like the way it's read, it's kind of like what we would call nonverbal communication, right? Today we'll say 80 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. Well, that's the same thing. Just look on my face, or maybe I'm angry, I'm speaking something without even using any words. And so you have the same idea that what Paul is saying there in the context. Let's go back to Romans, 10:9, right? If you confess with your mouth what? Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised from the dead, you will be saved. And all who call upon the name of the Lord, Romans 10:13, will be saved. So the context clearly is the gospel of Jesus Christ here. So this is why, again, in verse 16, 15, he uses the word gospel. 16, he uses the word gospel. And then he says, hey, look, they've already heard. Faith does come by hearing. There's no doubt. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ, Romans 10:17. And we are saved by faith. But he says, but haven't they already heard? And that's what he brings up. So to me, I think it's pointing us to the idea of pay attention. Now, how can we speak with 100% certainty? No, I don't think so. But there is something, what I will say, there is 100% certainty that God created the constellations in the zodiac, with the sun going through them from our perspective, which is a lot how the Bible speaks. The Bible speaks a lot in scientific terms, but it speaks it from our perspective. The sun rising and the sun setting, the sun going in its circuit. Well, the sun does go in a circuit through the 12 zodiac stars. So he didn't do that by accident. He could have, again, as I said in the beginning, he could have made it all just equally blank, all the stars being the same, and there would have been no real circuit to differentiate. But he didn't. So let's look at the 12, which is what he did, and what are the modern, or even semi-modern associations. We know the zodiac signs were, as you mentioned earlier, many people in ancient times have worshipped them, which is false. And going back to Babylon and Greece, all cultures have looked at these 12, because why? They're universal. Everybody can look up and see these are the same 12, and they are the same 12 for everybody.
Which is a very significant number, may I add.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Indeed.
So this word Mazzaroth means appointed times, constellations, and ordered celestial signs. And it comes from a root word meaning to divide, to mark, or to assign. So in a way, I'm going to interpret what you're saying or what you're describing to us as, since there's no voice, but there's a voice, God is texting us. How about that? He sent a text.
Not this nonverbal language, which let's not reject that. Nonverbal still is communication.
Exactly.
You don't need to use a voice. We all know this every day.
That is so true. So it's important to also know that these signs are not random. They are appointed. What you described before, that they go when the sun is positioned. You said, is that how you said it? That the sun is
Looking at the sun, so we move, you know, the constellation behind the sun, because of our movement, changes. That's all. And so it'd be no different if I was looking at you and I saw the background behind you, and then I started walking in a circle. Well, what I was looking at behind you is going to shift based on my movement. And so I would say, oh, look at that thing. Oh, look at that's behind you. And then I go over here, like, oh, there's a tree behind you. Oh, look at that. There's the pool behind you, whatever. So in the same way, as we move around, the background star, the background constellation of the sun switches. And so, which is great for me because, again, right now, for example, you look at, some of the constellations are behind the sun, so I can't photograph anything. But if I wait 2 months, then all of a sudden we have moved and I can do photographs there because now there's another constellation that's in the background. So because the sun's in front of it, it's blinding. I can't do any imaging. So I got to wait. So I'm very glad about that as we move around, it shows, again, that background constellation will change once per month.
That is just mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about perfection.
So perfect.
Wow. That's really wonderful. Genesis 1 verse 14 reads, and God said, let there be light in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So this word seasons here in the Hebrew refers to moedim, meaning appointed times, and the same word is used for the feasts, right? So when the heavens were created to mark God's calendar, his times, his appointed times, it was done intentionally and orderly, right? Wow.
Look at if you look at everything in Genesis 1 there on the fourth day, certainly the sun and the moon and the stars. If you look at those three sources of light, so to speak, you can guide everything. We know that in the Bible they use the moon as a lunar cycle. Every time 29.5 days, you got a new moon, which is where the moon is. It's new in the sense that it's in front of the sun, and therefore there's no light on it because it's perfectly there. And so I love that because the skies are super dark. I don't have to fight with the full moon. I don't like the moon. Okay, the moon gets in the way of my pictures. I know. I mean, I love the moon, but I just need it to be out of the way when I'm trying to take a picture because it brightens everything and washes everything out. But I can tell you, so I follow the moon cycle very carefully because it gets in the way of my imaging. But what that tells me is, again, it goes basically every 2 weeks. So you have this 29 day cycle. And that's the Hebrews used that in many ways. They had a new moon festival, as you mentioned, a festival celebration, and of course the sun. We know the sun gives days and years, days and months, and everything, seasons. And as I mentioned, the constellations. Just by looking at the Big Dipper, I can tell you what month it is. I can tell you the season for like where it is at midnight. If it's over here at basically the 3 o'clock position, I know it's March 21st. It's planting time. Let's start planting our seed. So it's really amazing. Like we know there it is, or as it's getting close, we need to start planting our seed because of the seasons of the year. And then of course, in the summertime, it's going to be up here and I can see it's harvest time. It's coming, simply just based on the Big Dipper itself. So this is where what God said here, that, nobody's walking around with clocks or calendars. Everybody would be looking at the heavens for what? for signs and seasons, for days and years, and of course to divide the day and the night. So God set it up perfectly.
Wow. So the ancient cultures studied the heavens, they understood the times, the seasons. They worshipped based on the movements in the heavens, and it's because everything is written in the stars, basically. I find that fascinating. And who
Really,
taught them?
well, what's interesting is, even say, well, I guess there's no doubt. I think God originally probably explained some things. That I think that's reasonable. I can't prove it, but the other thing too, though, is what we know is that in our culture, people go outside and they might look at something and they go, "Oh, what's that big bright star up there?" I go, "Oh, that's Jupiter. So that's a planet." Or, "Oh, what's that red one over there?" "Oh, that's Mars, actually." Or, "That's Arcturus. Arcturus is very red. Aldebaran's very red. Antares is very red," which is, so you look at these stars. So the problem that we have is that the more you sit outside and look, and the more you're just, I mean, imagine being not with no light pollution every night. You're up looking. So pretty soon you begin to notice, you begin to learn simply by being familiar with it. Like sometimes people will go, "Oh, what star is that?" I go, "Oh, no, that's not a star." And they go, "How do you know?" I go, "Because there's no bright star there. That's got to be a planet." So you know that doesn't belong there. The one time I actually believe I saw like a UFO was I saw something, and it was actually right around dawn. And I came out and I was looking to the west, which the sun rises in the east. I was looking to the west and I saw this super bright star there or something. And someone's like, "Oh, no, that's Venus." I go, "No, no, no. Venus is always near the sun. It cannot be." So anyways, all that to say is when I looked up, I watched it for a long time and I realized this is out of place. So something's odd here. And then boom, it just like vanished. It like sucked away. And I was like, "What did I do?" I spent 20 minutes watching it, maybe even longer. But
It
the
was a
point is,
UFO.
yeah, that's what I thought. I thought this is unusual. But that's the point, is that you don't even necessarily need to be taught anything. You could simply just learn it. But this is where the transition begins, where people then begin to assign power and spiritual influence to these objects in there, rather than just recognizing they were given by God to be a blessing of a calendar or a clock, which
Yeah.
is what it says. They will be for signs and seasons, days and years, Moedim, etc.
Yeah. So when we look at the gospel and the stars, we see that the ancient Hebrew understanding shared by early believers was that the Mazzaroth told a complete redemptive story. 12 major constellations corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. We could say that. And they tell a story in order. And I like what you're saying. I mean, where I live, I don't get to see a lot of stars because there's so many lights in the city. But I would love to be able to just sit under the stars and look up. And I'm sure if you do this on a daily basis, you learn and you get to say, "That's out of place," like what happened to you. That would be a tremendous experience. The first sign is Virgo. And Virgo talks about the virgin, and the virgin brings the promise with her, right? And Virgo is the one that begins the story and is a prophetic announcement, right? Designed to unfold and develop, and it's from the Hebrew Bethula, and in Latin Virgo, which means virgin. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
What you find in some of the ancient zodiac, images, is you see again the consistency of these same constellations, but you also see them where they start, and that is with Virgo. You see kind of Virgo as being a starting point, all the way going around to the last one, which would be Leo. And so what Christians and others in really, I would say, modern times especially, but certainly in ancient times, what they recognize is, when we look up there, we see many times the meanings of these constellations have a similarity through various cultures. Not always the same, for sure, because every culture is different. Some cultures are far more pagan in their attribution of the signs to their own pantheon of gods. Okay,
Mhm.
but when you're looking at it from the biblical lens and you see the biblical story of the Mazzaroth and what we would describe as the intentionality of how God created these, you begin to go, well, that's interesting that if you look at these various constellations, they seem to match up pretty nicely with a generalized story of what we understand the gospel being from the first mention in Genesis 3:15 that this coming Messiah figure would be a seed of a woman. And of course, we know not till later in the time of Isaiah that God gives a very specific revelation to Isaiah that the virgin would conceive and bring forth a son as a sign. And as you mentioned, Bethula is very clear. It's this idea, in Greek, it's the word parthenos. It's very specifically a virgin, not just a young woman. And even in Hebrew, there's been proof to show that Bethula means a virgin. Maybe not necessarily in modern Hebrew, but certainly in ancient biblical Hebrew.
Mhm. Interesting. So then, through this sign, or what it represents for the Christian gospel or for the gospel, life is promised before life arrived. A virgin will conceive. This is not astrology, it's prophecy. This is the virgin holding the seed, and she has a branch in her right hand, which I wish we had 3 hours to talk about all these other stars that are within each of the 12 constellations, right? She has a branch in her right hand, which points to a twofold testimony of the coming one. That's Christ, right? What do you have to say about that?
This is fun because when you're looking at these images, and historically speaking, what it does reveal is that there's no doubt that historically the consensus from all of ancient history is why is it that many of them have the same themes and the same names for these very specific constellations that are available universally to everybody. But many times, like you said, well, why do all of them have a branch? Well, we know in that one of the words for branch, one of the themes of the branch is refers to the Messiah. I mean, to me, this is so awesome in the sense that even his name Nazarene, Matthew says that in order to fulfill the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene, which is the word netzer. That's the idea of a branch, and comes from the Hebrew. And it's interesting that there's no specific verse that fulfills exactly that he will be from the city of Nazareth. But yet Matthew's using the language, and again, as we know in the book of Jeremiah, it calls him specifically the branch. And so
Yeah.
you think you have a virgin holding a branch. Okay, that brings together some amazing themes in the Bible. It's remarkable.
Jeremiah 23:5 says, Behold, or listen closely, since I'm using the Amplified, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. I love that. And he will reign as king and act wisely, and will do those things that accomplish justice and righteousness in the land. Woof!
Just the first one.
That's the first one. I mean, that's just the first one. The second one is the sign or the constellation of Libra, the scales or the price. Tell me about that one.
I mean, this is where you get an understanding of that. See, that's in Egyptian mythology or storytelling as well. That when God looks at humanity, there's a scale. Well, what's the scale? Well, the scale is God's perfection, his own holiness and righteousness. And as we know, mankind has failed. And so when we preach the gospel today, one of the first things that we need to share is We don't start with God loves you and has a plan for your life, even though that is true. The gospel, if you read the book of Romans, which Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the power of the gospel, right? It's the power of God unto
Oh,
salvation.
God. Mhm.
As he develops the gospel, he doesn't talk about the word gospel means good news, but the first thing he does is right after Romans 1:16 and 17, he goes into Romans 1:18. The wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. And then he goes on, and then in the rest of that, he's showing mankind's in trouble. In chapter 2, he shows the religious Jews are in trouble. And then in chapter 3, what does he say? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So the first 3 chapters of the gospel book is showing the bad news. People have been weighed like the scales. They have been weighed with the scales, and they are in trouble. Romans 3:19, it says God declares the whole world guilty. And then he begins to say, but chapter 4, we can be saved by faith. And then he goes on and he presents the rest of the good news of being saved by faith through grace. So it's not surprising then that the prophecy that you have, that Genesis 3:15, which corresponds with Isaiah 7:14 and Jeremiah 23. The next thing you would know is, hey, well, okay, we got this prophecy of this virgin and a branch. So what? Why do we need that? Because you have been weighed in the scales and you're in big trouble. But see, God starts it with hope. And then he reveals arrogant mankind that what do we need hope for? Well, in order to understand and appreciate the good news of the gospel, we need to understand the bad news, which is exactly what Libra does as it relates to the scales.
Daniel 5:27, thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Oh my word. I love what you said. The Lord starts with hope. He presents hope, and then he grabs a mirror and says, take a look at yourself. You're not so holy. You're not so perfect. I love that. I love that. We see in this sign that Christ enters to pay the price. He's coming for the purpose of redemption. That is the good news. That is the word gospel. There's hope. I didn't really know because I'm thinking that I'm perfect, that I don't need anything. I don't need salvation. And then God says, let me just explain. You're in trouble. But don't worry, I have someone that's going to pay the price for you, and he's going to change the weight of the scale. He's going to provide righteousness and justice for you, even though you don't deserve it. Hello.
This is where you see again, mentioned earlier, that one of the best stories or imageries, iconographic, if you want to say it that way, imageries that you see in Egypt is they have in their own religion a scale, and then the person over here would their heart would be put on the scale, and then
Yep.
the justice would be put on the other side to see whether it was worthy. And so this is universal ideas going back to 2000 3000 BC in Egypt. That's a long time ago. So the idea of the language of Libra and being associated with scales fits what we know of this mythology within and I say that in the sense of religious history in ancient cultures. They understood this, so God put it right up there in advance. So I think it's fine. I find it fascinating.
I find it amazing that the Lord would go through all this trouble to reach people throughout the ages. And you're right, the Egyptians understood very well that we were going to be weighed. And they spent, I'm studying for a course I'm going to teach on archaeology. And I talk about Egypt a lot because even though their religion was, derailed from the Lord's path, they understood the concept of life and death in the sense that they knew that there was a balance somewhere. And they prepared for the afterlife their entire existence. They prepared for the moment when they crossed over, and they didn't want that. I can't remember right now the name of the deity that they have that eats the heart that's found wanting. Oh my goodness.
The whole the whole system of burials and mummification, and they have the little jars, and then the food. They were planning and hoping to make it. And this is why one of the most famous archaeological records that has been found over and over is the Book of the Dead,
Yep.
where they'd have prayers and other things for them in anticipation of them crossing over into the underworld and being reunited. But again, they all had to go through the process, with Osiris, the god of the underworld, and the other all their things. But yes, so here we are again. But what do we have? Even before the Egyptians, on day 4, Libra was created.
I'm thinking, I wish Christians would have the same preoccupation with the afterlife. I wish they would understand the reality of us standing in front of a holy God at the Bema and giving an account for our lives and our deeds and our words and our thoughts. Hello. And these people got it all right from the stars.
Person.
Pretty cool. Okay, so the next one is Scorpio, the conflict. The enemy strikes the heel is wounded, darkness closes in, but the story does not end with a wound. Tell us about that one.
It's interesting that when you read the Bible, as we know right there in Genesis 3:15, you can't read the Bible and understand the gospel fully without understanding the war. There is a war that has taken place between God and his enemy. At least his primary enemy is Satan, the devil, the dragon, the serpent of old, as he's called in the book of Revelation. And so we're introduced right here to, within Scorpio, that there is a conflict. And God is not at war with humanity. God is at war for the sake of humanity, for his kids who were created in his image. And there's somebody else that comes into the picture. And we know in Genesis 3:15 that this particular person in 3:15 and 16, the proto-evangelion, the first mention of the gospel, is that the seed of the woman would be harmed by Satan. But this seed of the woman, which ultimately we know is the Lord Jesus, would crush the head of the serpent and so of the enemy. And so what Scorpio does is it brings us right into the realization, again, in the imagery and even in the history of this conflict.
Luke 10:19 says, "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions." So he anticipated all of this. When he designed the heavens, when he decided what was going to be written in the Gospels, or in the Word of God, actually, he anticipated all of this. And he said, look, I'm going to give you power. Yes, you're going to have to enter a conflict. There is a conflict over my soul, but I give you power. I give power unto you to tread on serpents and scorpions. And I find that fascinating.
Right out of the gate, we see, again, this message referring to the conflict, but also it's victory. I mean, when you think about the overall war, we all wonder about it. I mean, why would Satan, who is not God by any means, why would he risk going in open rebellion and defiance and going to war with a all-knowing and all-powerful being? I mean, that's just completely foolish. But, that's the nature of pride. I share this often where I remember as a kid, in at least with boys, it'd be easier, where you'd always see, some big, huge guy and one of the big kids, and you'd have some younger, smaller kid, which often was me. You'd go fight and wrestle with the big guy, and he would just thrash you. But yet you would not, because you were embarrassed and you were shamed in front of everybody else, you wouldn't ever give up. You would go to the end, and you'd like, dude, you're not going to beat him. No, I'm going to get him this time. But you're so blinded by your own pride that you actually think you're going to take this big guy down. But yet everybody around you is like, this is just not going to happen. But pride blinds you. We know 1 Timothy 3:7 that Satan fell through pride. And so, but right here we see the conflict, but yet God is assured us victory. And as you mentioned, Luke 10, Jesus himself, who gets the victory, now transfers that authority and power over to us. Colossians 2:15 says the same thing, that Jesus publicly disarmed all the principalities and the powers and the enemies. They're running around with no weapons. And so he disarmed them in a public way based on the gospel. And so as Christians, we could take great comfort. And again, the Scorpio constellation and the messaging behind it fits very well with what we understand in the scripture, that Jesus is the victor, which we'll see more of that in some of the rest of them. But again, here, we're at least introduced to the conflict.
And I like what you said. And I think we forget a lot of times, I'm sure you're going to be in agreement with me, the transference of power. He has the power, but he gave us, he left us a power of attorney. And we forget all the time that we have authority over the enemy to trample, to destroy the works of the devil. I think we forget a lot. Do you agree with that?
You read that passage that you see that Luke 10, where he had sent out the 70 and he gave them, this, he began to establish the kingdom and to show them what he was doing. And this is why in Matthew 28, when he commissions us, the first thing he says in verse 18 is, all power and authority has been given to me. Therefore go. And we're 2 Corinthians 5. What are we? We are ambassadors for him in this kingdom. So we come with the authority, the power of attorney, the everything else that we come walking in. We come walking with, again, the authority of Jesus himself as an ambassadors, as we proclaim the gospel and we bring forth his word, his message. We understand how ambassadorship works. So when you're in a foreign country, you represent who you come from. And so it's not a surprise by any means.
Amen. I agree with that.